So I've been given the great honor of talking about trauma and the brain in just a few minutes. So I really appreciate being invited here, though. This is a great event. I come to you guys from California, and I grew up in D.C., and so I knew I was going to sweat here, but y'all got to get it together with the humidity here. And so let's jump right into this because I know it's lunchtime, and I want to start by talking about a story. I want to tell you all a story. And for the sake of this story, we'll call the guy who I'm talking about, his name, we'll call him Mike. And so Mike, he grew up in a neighborhood that many of you are probably familiar with. It was crime-ridden, drug-infested, gangs everywhere, and he was raised by a single mother. And this community that he was a part of, for many people, they will look out at it and think that this is something that's going to take anyone down, especially a kid who's coming up in this neighborhood, in this environment. And as we look at this young man and the challenges that he faced, what was remarkable about him is that he was able to avoid being a part of gangs. He was able to avoid being a part of the drug-involved culture. And he was actually able to achieve a scholarship to a private school. But like anyone, any person, any teenager, he dealt with stress. And what stress can do is it can build up pressure. And so when we talk about building up pressure, we're talking about someone feeling the weight of what's going on with them. So like any teenager, he likely dealt with problems with friends or relationships. And these are stresses that everyone faces, and they feel the pressure of this building up. But unlike some people, Mike didn't just deal with regular types of stress, regular types of stressful life events. He dealt with extreme stressful life events. And if we bring these slides up really quick, still does take everyone. That's still true. It's just not my slides. But what he dealt with were what we call traumatic life events. And a traumatic life event is anything that makes you feel that your life is in danger or you'll seriously be hurt, or someone around you, their life is in danger or seriously will be hurt. And so Mike, at the age of 8, saw his best friend killed and had to hold him in his arms. And then his mother dealt with very, very difficult relationships with partners. Her partners, several of them, physically abused her, and Mike had to witness that. And what really took Mike to a place where he felt that it was too much was when he was 16 years old, he found out that his brother was killed by gun violence. Y'all know where this is going. And then what happened was, this is a big balloon. I didn't mean for it to be this big. But what happened? The dollar store, you get what you can get. But what happened was this stressful life event, this extremely stressful life event made Mike feel that he needed to carry a gun to protect himself. And during the time that he carried the gun, for about a year, he held it on him, and eventually he shot another gang member to defend himself. And the gang member was seriously injured. But again, another highly stressful life event for Mike. Lord, it popped. It popped. I was as afraid as you were, just so you know. But what happens when someone feels like they're going to pop? What happens is they move into a backward slide. One slide forward. Oh, am I going back? Let's see. All right, there we go. Laser, all right. That turns it off. I promise you guys. All right. Could you guys tell me which one's the forward? The green. Okay, that's doing this though. Okay, let's go to the next one. I promise I'm not a stand-up. All right, okay, here we go. I'm a real psychologist. So what happens when you feel like you're about to pop? What happens is you go into survival mode. And this is how trauma impacts the brain, just like any disease, any virus. It impacts the brain because it rewires the brain to always be on alarm, always be ready for threat, always think that things that are happening around them, around the person, is unsafe. And so in Mike's case, when you're dealing with these stressful life events, the regular ones, but also the extreme life events that are traumatic events, what it does is it starts to program a part of the brain that we call the limbic system, and specifically the amygdala. This back part of the brain is probably one of our most primitive areas of the brain. And what it does is it assesses threat, and it's responsible for us being aggressive towards other people. Now here's the thing, when someone is highly active and that alarm system is constantly going off, it's hard for them to use the frontal part of the brain that we call the frontal lobes, but for this purpose we'll call it the thinking part of the brain. That's the part of the brain that deals with us stopping and making wise decisions. Being able to say, I can wait to get the car that I want, or I see that this person is running at me, but they're not actually running at me to threaten me, they're running because they're trying to catch the bus. It's what helps us read situations accurately. And the thing about trauma is that it can constantly make you feel that you need to survive. And behind any survival instinct is a deep desire to feel safe. And when we deal with kids and people in general who've experienced trauma, who constantly feel like they're about to pop or they have popped already, they are doing the best that they know how to stay safe, even though that might not be the best thing to keep them safe. They are still reliving that trauma. They are still in crisis mode, even though there's no crisis around. And that's what causes the conflict between not only within themselves, but also towards other people. And so when we look at how people respond in this situation, part of what we're looking at is, if you could go to the next slide, is some of these responses that young people have. And so when we look at what trauma can lead to, just take a look at some of these different responses that are coming up here on screen. Yep. Young people and people in general, when they are experiencing trauma, again, can sometimes feel that the trauma is ever present, or the threat, I should say, is ever present. And so ways of thinking about situations, like sometimes thoughts pop into their head that take them back to that place. Or if we look at how someone might feel that they need to avoid situations that remind them of the trauma that they've experienced. Or they might even have physiological reactions that come back to them when they are in situations that remind them of the trauma. One of the most important processes that goes on when we talk about trauma's impact on the brain is that when a person feels threatened and that alarm system is activated, that back of the brain that I told you about, what it does is it sets off a series of cascading events, one of which is setting off our sympathetic nervous system. So this is what's responsible for our fight, flight, or freeze response. And what this is when we feel threatened, when we hear something, it makes us get mobilized and ready to protect ourselves from this threat, right? Now, this might not happen in today's Baltimore, but in the Wire Baltimore, if you heard someone walking behind you at night, right, and you might start feeling your body tense up. You might start feeling that you need to get ready and either run away, or if you're like me, you find your keys and they become this makeshift weapon just in case, right? And you're protecting yourself because your body has taken in information that says it's threatened. Imagine living like that every second of your life. That's what many of our kids deal with when they have experienced trauma, not only trauma as children, but ongoing trauma in our community. And so when we talk about situations such as gun violence, when we talk about physical abuse, sexual abuse, rape, these are experiences that constantly make young people feel like they're going to pop. And another thing to keep in mind is that these experiences build up. Just the way that balloon built up over time, if someone doesn't have a healthy way to release that pressure, to release that stress, it gets bigger and bigger and has a greater impact on who they are. One of the important parts of the story that I told you about Mike, which actually comes from a prominent psychiatrist, Dr. Richard Dudley, who wrote for the Harvard Business publication about his forensic interview with this young man when he was on trial for court, was that many of the officers felt that he was remorseless about his act. But in actuality, he had learned to survive by not showing emotion. And by not showing emotion, by numbing himself out, this was actually one of his reactions to the trauma. And so if we go to the next slide here, looking at a young man named Ian who dealt with different traumas. I'm just going to ask you guys to go to the next one. All right. Who dealt with different traumas. Look at what he says. So a lot of things that made me scared or made me nervous, they don't scare me no more. They don't affect me. Like if a whole bunch of dudes kept on looking at me, I used to feel nervous. And if someone kept on like giving me mean looks, I used to get nervous. It don't happen no more. It's like some of the feeling is just gone. If they look at me now, I look at them right back like what? On the street, people might look at this and say, you know, he finally grew a pair. He's finally a man. But in actuality, what we're seeing is a reaction to trauma. And many times, particularly in our young Black and Latino male communities, we are reinforcing traumatic stress reactions, symptoms of trauma. That's what post-traumatic stress disorder is. Symptoms of trauma, and saying that's what it means to be a man. And so it's important for us to recognize these reactions for what they are, because even though people say you shouldn't be afraid, fear is a good thing because it keeps you out of situation. What makes it bad is when it becomes overwhelming. And it overwhelms you to the point that you respond to situations in a way that isn't accurate. So someone comes to speak to you and you think that they are trying to disrespect you and you yell at them and it escalates. You might have misread that situation. The fear has overwhelmed you and now you're responding inaccurately. But knowing that, okay, I shouldn't walk down this street because I don't know who's down there or what might happen, and keeping yourself safe is a very healthy response. And so part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to help young people better understand how to respond to situations that are actually threatening in a healthy way, and the ones that aren't threatening, helping to respond to those situations in a way that also makes sense. And so really quickly, I want to give you 3 quick points or 3 ways that we can start facilitating this healing process. The first way is through our recognizing triggers and early warning signs. And so a trigger is just anything that reminds someone of the trauma. And what it does is it allows people to know I need to be aware of what sets me off, that what makes me want to pop, and it starts the healing process. The next, on the next slide, as you'll see, is, and the second thing that you want to do is you want to start helping the person understand the skills that they bring to the table. Resilience is this ability to bounce back after difficult life situations. All of you all in here, whether you are going through something small or major, have survived something. And being survivors gives you several skills that allow you to survive other stressful life events in the future and survive it in a healthy way. And if we go to this next slide right here, what we understand is that when someone is able to survive, they can use skills that they have, but sometimes they might not have certain skills. And they have to learn new coping strategies. And so, as you can see here, the second way that you deal with it is being able to use and develop new coping strategies. The last way to deal with stress and to deal with these triggers that you might face, the last way is we have to be able to understand our story. Many times when people experience trauma, like the story before, I think these were some beautiful stories before, we want to run away from that experience. We don't want to be associated with it, even though it seems overwhelming. Trauma can be all-encompassing. It can make a person feel like that's their identity. And while that's not healthy, it's also not healthy to say that this isn't a part of my experience. This isn't a part of my story. And so what therapy does, and what we work to do with the community, is to help people incorporate that part of their experience into their story, but to also understand how they've grown from it and to better understand how they've learned new skills to deal with the reactions that come from it. And so it's not about eliminating the trauma, it's about being able to better understand how that unfolds. I want to end with a really quick story. There was a youngster that dealt with a tremendous amount of difficult situations. He grew up kind of like a prince, a young prince. His mother and father loved him, but he had one of those uncles that you really don't want to invite to the cookout, but he always shows up. He was always into something mischievous. He was always doing something that got people in trouble. And one day, he was around the father's house, and he had created this melee. And this melee broke out. The son was still there. The youngster was there. And the father came out. He said, I got to help my brother in this situation. And during the course of the melee, the youngster saw his father get killed. And the only thing that gives me hope about this situation is that he grew up to be the Lion King. Talking about the movie. Talking about the movie. Let's sink in. I'm talking about the actual movie, The Lion King. Let's build up Lion Kings throughout our community. Thank you, guys.